Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to draw one of those international comparisons that Boris Johnson has such a distaste for. On this occasion, how is it that the UK government, who tried to prioritise the economy over health, have actually managed to create a far worse economic downturn than comparable nations with more of a focus on eliminating the virus? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the data is out now, economic data, and the UK is now in recession. Our economy has contracted for 2 quarters in a row, fulfilling the criterion. Now, that I make that statement on its own is not a harsh judgment of the Conservative government overseeing it, because unlike that same Conservative government, I don't blame a government for overseeing such an event if it is caused by global events and would have been inevitable. But the fact of the matter is, comparable nations are in the same boat, i.e. they are in recession. China's gotten away with it. China is not. But all the other major economies are, as far as I can tell. But what is definitely the case is the entire G7 group of advanced economies is definitely in recession, and in deep recession at that. But although the criterion for entering recession is very simple, it isn't a binary event. Because, for example, there isn't really a great deal of difference between a country enjoying 0.1% growth over a 6-month period and then that same country suffering a 0.1% contraction. I mean, it's basically flat in both cases, but in the former, you would say that the economy is growing, and in the latter, you would say recession. Ooh, worrying recession word. The depth and the duration of recession, and indeed growth, matters. I mean, there's been quite a lot of times over the years when the government said, oh, you know, we're in growth, and it's like, yeah, but it's like just above zero. It's basically a stagnant economy. It's just technically not in recession. Now, in terms of the depth of this recession, this is where fingers can reasonably and inevitably be pointed towards the government's handling of the economy under Boris Johnson and the Chancellor Rishi Sunak, because Boris Johnson began this crisis when other countries were adopting measures to suppress the virus. Boris Johnson was emphasising the importance of the economy. All these other countries, he was saying, are too timid. We need to embrace this, take it on the chin, all the rest of it. Managing the economy was the justification also for when we eventually had to change our minds and go into lockdown, for easing those lockdown restrictions in the way that we did, not only in terms of the speed but also the type. Because, for example, Boris Johnson has spent months, and I mean months, banging on about the need to get schools open. Fair enough, I agree, but if he considers it so important that he kept bringing it up at Prime Minister's questions when he wasn't even asked about it, why did he open up pubs, restaurants, hotels, theme parks, and so on before school? Schools are still not open now in England and Wales. And it's because he thought it was best for the economy in the short term to open all those other things. You know, everything that they have done that's been criticised, he has defended in terms of protecting the economy. We're doing this for the economy. We're doing this for the economy. So why is it then that the economic downturn that we have suffered is the worst in the G7? And not just by a little bit either. We're not just talking about all these nations are basically clustered around a particular level of recession. No. These charts you can see, which are from The Guardian, but based on official statistics, show the extent of the problem. Our nearest rival in terms of depth of recession is France. But our downturn is 50% worse. And in the G7, you have nations who took a mixture of different approaches to COVID. You know, at a very basic level, you had nations like Japan and Germany that got right on top of it, and fairly quickly. Canada's approach was fairly decent as well. You had Italy and France who reacted late, but took very serious action to pursue a zero COVID strategy once the crisis unfolded. They then did, they left no stone unturned in terms of dealing with it at that point. It was just later than it should have been. The US is a mixed bag because the government is, if anything, even more reckless than our own. But the confederacy nature of the country, it means that you've got individual states who can do their own thing to a certain extent. So the states who had governors and legislators in general without their heads up their arses were able to take robust action. And that massively countered the dangerous lunacy of the orange one. But the UK, where the bulk of the population is in England, where we have no effective devolution, so it was entirely down to Boris Johnson's government, they put the economy first. This is what they insisted, they put the economy first. This country has actually seen, by a mile, the worst downturn of all of these advanced economies. Now, and this is from, by the way, having a very buoyant economy. I mean, don't get me wrong, I thought our economy was stagnant before this, flatlining. That's what it looked like to me. You know, although this is the first time in over a decade that we have entered technical recession, we've had quarters where it's gone into contraction before and then not exactly bounced back into solid growth, but just gone a bit above zero, even on zero at times. So we've been skirting on the edge of recession for a while thanks to Brexit. But Boris Johnson insisted that our economy was buoyant during last December's election. Flourishing it was. And he wouldn't lie to us, would he? I mean, I know he was sacked as a journalist for lying twice, but he only lied to newspaper readers. I mean, they're not real people. And yes, okay, he was also sacked for lying as an MP, indeed a front bench MP. But he was just lying to politicians. I mean, they're definitely not real people. And yeah, okay, he even lies about his own name. And yeah, he lied on that bus and he in front of that JCB. And oh, and at the party conference with that kipper. But, you know, he wouldn't lie to us. Not now. So I'll take him at his word we had a buoyant economy. Then the pandemic hit and we're into a deep recession. How on earth does he explain why the depth of our recession is not comparable or shallower than that for other nations who took a much tougher line on COVID? You know, with other nations, their recession is not just less deep, but much less deep. It's much shallower. You know, obviously it's too early to say how long the recession will last in any country, because again, you know, to get the overall picture, it's not just about the depth, but the duration as well. If you go into a very deep recession, but then you bounce straight back out of it, you may end up with a much less severe impact on your economy than someone goes into a shallower one, but for longer. But I'm going to guess that ours isn't going to bounce back more quickly than our G7 companions, which is based on two things. First of all, the forecast that we keep getting for how quickly we will bounce back, and when they say bounce back, they mean get back into growth. Although we're not talking about years and years, thank goodness. But every time there's a new forecast comes out, it's downgraded in terms of the likelihood of a quick bounce back. You know, and in fact, the irony was, and I talked a little bit about this last week, the Bank of England, again, they had to downgrade their forecast for how long it will take to come out of it. But they were able to say that actually the depth of the recession is not as bad as feared. The contraction. So we have got way worse contraction than the other G7 nations, and yet it's not as bad as we feared. Wow. And the second reason I don't think we're going to bounce back very quickly is economists have been really, really clear, economists, that you get your economy out of the COVID hole by beating COVID. We haven't taken a strategy that does that. And here's the thing that really gets me is I know that Boris Johnson understands that. And the reason I know that is because he articulated it months ago. Now, Boris Johnson does not articulate very much at all. You know, he's not a details person. He's never able to really explain anything. When he's asked to, he fumbles a lot. He was able to explain this. He explained, for example, this is while we were under lockdown, and he was trying to make the case for not coming out of it too quickly. He explained, for example, that if you just open up your economy, that you will actually cause longer term economic downturn, and there's several reasons for this he was able to articulate. So first of all, if you've got a business and their workers are unreliable because either they're constantly having to isolate or even just becoming ill as a result of the virus, then you're constantly in a situation where you have that unreliable workforce. That doesn't help a business. As a result, the business won't be as effective, and therefore your economy, and this will be happening all across the country, the economy will not return to growth under such a scenario. You need to actually stamp out the virus in order to be able to get back to sustained growth. He understood that. He explained it. It was very much in line with what independent economists were saying. And yet here we are. You know, he did release the lockdown, whether under pressure from his own side, because for all his articulation of that point, backbench Conservative MPs weren't impressed. Most of his cabinet were wanting the lockdown removed. The right-wing Tory supporting press were wanting it removed. You know, it could just have been under that pressure. What is quite clear from these results is that if Boris Johnson was genuinely prioritising the economy to a greater extent than some comparable nations, let's say Germany, for example, then he has failed spectacularly badly, because it's the results, the actual results are far, far worse. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.